Hi, fourth grade friends, it's Mrs. Hoyer. In part two of our summarizing lesson, we are going to take the important story details that we gathered in part one and use that information to briefly restate what happened in A Jacket in the Boot. Before we begin, you're going to need a couple of things so that you can be successful. The first thing that you're going to need is the graphic organizer that we created in part one, and you're also going to need a pencil or something to write with. You're also going to need access to your device's pause and play button. So let's give that a try. When I say go, I'm going to ask that you hit pause. And while you are pausing the video, I need you to go and gather those materials. Go and get your graphic organizer and something to write with. And when you have gathered those materials and you have returned to your device, then you can resume the lesson by hitting play. Okay, go. All right, welcome back. I hope that you went and gathered the materials that you're going to need to be successful, because now is the time where we are going to turn that information into a brief summary or a short retelling in our own words. If I think back to part one, the important story details that I need to include are the characters, where and when the story is taking place, the problem that the characters are facing, some of the key events that happened, and of course, how they solved the problem. When I write a story, I like to think of a certain mnemonic device, and that mnemonic device is somebody wanted, but so then. So let's start with the somebody. The somebody would be reflected here in the characters, the who in our story. I know that our main characters are James and the American boy. And I also know that they wanted to do something in our story, and that is go and play at the park. So as I write my summary, the first sentence that I'm going to write is the somebody and what they wanted to do. James and the narrator wanted, who remembers, what did they want to do? Oh, I can hear you. They wanted to go to the park. Now here's where I'm going to add in my setting, because I think this is important, because based on the fact that it is a cool afternoon, James needed something, which then will lead us into the problem. So I need to be thinking about that cool afternoon. Do you remember what it was that James needed because it was such a cool afternoon? If you need to pause the video to think about that for a moment, go ahead. All right, you're right. He needed a jacket. Okay? So James and the narrator wanted to go to the park. James needed a jacket because it was a cool afternoon. Oops. I got ahead of myself there. Because it was a cool afternoon. All right, so let's just recap a little bit. James and the narrator wanted to go to the park. James needed a jacket because it was a cool afternoon. So if I think back to that mnemonic device, somebody wanted, but so then, I have this somebody, and I have what they wanted, and I also introduced the setting a little bit. Now I need to be thinking about the but so then. That is where we're going to introduce the problem, which is James uses a word or phrase that really confuses our narrator. So what I'm going to add is that James thinks he left his jacket in the boot, which confuses our narrator. James thinks he left his jacket in the boot, which confuses our narrator. All right. So now I have told you about the somebody. I've told you what they wanted, and I shared the but, or the problem. So now I need to be thinking about, so what did they do about that problem and how was it solved? So if I think back to my graphic organizer, after they are looking confused, how did we solve that problem? Okay, down here at the solution. Well, James has to explain to him that the boot is actually the trunk of a car. So that is where what I'm going to add. James thinks he left his jacket in the boot, which confuses our narrator. James explains that the boot is the trunk of a car. James explains that the boot is the trunk of the car. Then our narrator is no longer confused. All right. So let's do a quick check and make sure we've included all the important story details. James and the narrator wanted to go to the park. James needed a jacket because it was a cool afternoon. James thinks he left his jacket in the boot, which confuses our narrator. James explains that the boot is the trunk of a car. Our narrator is no longer confused. I think we did a really nice job today identifying the somebody, what they wanted, but what happened, so what did James do, and then finally at the end, he is no longer confused. What I'd like you to do for some more at-home practice so you can continue practicing writing a summary at home is think of a story that you know really well, or think back to a time when I read aloud a story to you. I want you to practice writing at least 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences to summarize that story, okay? That would be your at-home practice that you can do so you can practice more summaries at home.